Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, and we're on episode 39. Oh my goodness. I can't even contain the excitement anymore. How's everybody doing? Anyway, as you all may or may not know, election season is upon us. Yes, it is. And by the time you are listening to this podcast, it'll probably be election day. At least election season is upon us in America, I should say. I don't know what's going on in other countries. A lot of them seem to be going through elections or passing in and out of them too, from the general gist of what I've been getting from my friends that are international. But yes, it's election time in America. So by the time you've been listening to this podcast, the release date will be 2018 election day for Congress in the United States. And so I thought I'd take a moment in this episode to talk about my voting experiences, uh, having voted in two different states. So yeah, let's jump right in there. Well, technically three, but I'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, I did kids voting in North Carolina when I was a kid. They had this whole like thing where you come out with your parents and you could do fake voting with them, and they'd even put the results on the news. It was kind of fun, and it was a way to kind of make people feel like they were civically involved. I don't think they do that here in Kentucky or Indiana. I think sometimes in schools they'll do mock elections and let the children see the results, but there it was like part of the state was doing it, so it was it was pretty cool. And I actually voted for Bush over Gore. So, which is interesting because I ended up really hating him as a president. Anyway, that's a whole sidebar. Um, yeah, in this week's podcast, I want to talk about my two main voting experiences in Indiana and Kentucky. So the first election I was eligible to vote in was in Kentucky in 2007. Prior to Obama being elected, there was a statewide race. Well, there were several races at the time, but there was a statewide governor race, and I actually campaigned for the person who ended up winning, Stephen Beshear. But there, the what am I trying to say? So in Kentucky, what I found is very interesting. Well, first of all, back then, what was really crazy was when I went to register to vote, I wanted to register as an independent because I didn't really have a political party allegiance in mind. Today I am aligned with the Libertarian Party, but back then I didn't really have an allegiance. So, and what was so odd was then I went to vote by my college, and they let me vote by my college even though I was in college and some of my stuff was still addressed to my parents' address, which was still within the state but not next to my college. They still let me vote next to my college, which was pretty cool. They I went to come in to vote, and I said, "Yeah, I'm an independent," and they just put me down as O on the registrar as other. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's still that way. I think now you can actually sign as independent. It doesn't really matter to me though, because I am officially a LP party member, so it will say L when I sign in. But I was like, "Are you serial?" Like you can't just say you're an independent voter. No, that's other. Other is way too blanket of a term, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah, so I went in and I voted. And what I find interesting about Kentucky that we have is because we're in the middle in terms of state size, we're like 26th, but we have the fourth most counties. We have 120. So county races are almost more important than city races in a lot of ways, you know. Um, and we have these things called judge executives, which I guess everybody has some kind of a county head executive position, but these people, judge executives, are ours, and it's quite hot. It's quite a heated contest usually, whatever county you're in, who wins that one. And then we have these things called judge magistrates, which is like a council that it's that is under the judge executive, right? That you vote for, and it has districts. So it's kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And generally speaking, um, the county area is separate from like the big city in the area. So like where my parents lived when I was in high school, Florence, the magistrates don't really have much impact on stuff within the city of Florence. So that's a big election. But then there's also the magistrates right around it, and it gets kind of convoluted unless you're in a place like Lexington, Fayette County that rolled it all into one, and now it doesn't matter anymore. So having these separate jurisdictions can get rather tricky. But believe it or not, in Kentucky, I don't find it quite as bad as what I'm about to talk about in Indiana. So anyway, it's interesting because I think it's hard to when you're somebody who lives in somewhere like Boone County. It's not when you live in a smaller county where the city doesn't, let's say it's got a big city or where the city doesn't control everything. There's just really small cities that are your county seats and control things. It's easier to pay attention to that kind of stuff. But if you live in a county like Boone that has a big city, you forget about all the, it's really hard to remember where the cutoff line is. I mean, you obviously, if you register to vote, they'll give you a sample ballot. Now, another great thing they've had in Kentucky, they finally do sample ballots. But they'll give you a sample ballot, and you can figure out who's on your ballot and where they are. But it's still like it's hard to think in your mind. Okay, so I'm technically outside the city limits, even though my address is this, and I vote for this person, and I'm in this city council district, or I'm outside, so I'm in this magistrate district, and I want to make sure that this person represents my views. And, because it gets so convoluted, I think a lot of times these people, run totally unopposed. So, but then you get in a bigger county. I've been hearing ads on the radio because now we live outside of Louisville, and I hear, suburban counties around there. These races all have jingles and have been real competitive, and people have been buying radio ads. It's really crazy to see. It's quite a difference of what I was used to as a kid, or maybe I just didn't pay attention as much when I was 18 and first registered to vote. So yeah, but the one thing I really I don't like about Kentucky that's pretty cool in other places. My family's from Wisconsin; they do this, and Indiana also does this. Is Kentucky doesn't have open primaries, so that means that you have to register for a party to vote in that primary. And I want to take a moment to talk about that right now before everybody gets in here. So the arguments I've heard from people why the primaries need to be closed is if you're not vested in the party, you shouldn't get to choose the candidate. But I think 2016 is the perfect example of why you should have open primaries. Because aside from the fact, I don't, it's as somebody who voted third party in the presidential election, it obviously doesn't matter to me whether or not the Trump or the Clinton Meister won. But if you look at the map of what states had open primaries and you look at who won, Trump did okay in states with open primaries, but he still received a lot of challenge in states that were open primaries. But if you look at Hillary Clinton, she got absolutely socked in states that were open primary. And I want to say to all those hardline partiers, those hardline Democrats and Republicans, that are like, no, all the primaries have to stay closed. I want to say to them, you want them to be open. We help you make a better candidates. The candidates that generally do well in a state with open primaries are probably going to do well in a general election when there's independent swing voters. So in my opinion, it's kind of foolish to keep your primary closed. But whatever, I don't make those rules. Especially as somebody who helps work for a third party, you just have to play by the rules that are given to you. But yeah, so Kentucky doesn't have those, and I really thought it was great and interesting in Indiana to have that option to pick, which primary I wanted to go vote in. And it's also becoming quite interesting because the Libertarian Party movement in Indiana is very strong. In case anyone hasn't noticed, I think they were like the third highest votes for Gary Johnson, but they also have statewide, there's been several people that have gotten quite a large percentage of the vote. And this year, they're trying to get 10% of the Secretary of State vote so they can reach major party status in Indiana, which would be quite an achievement because then they would have all their own primaries as well. And, it doesn't really mean much materially because, there's not usually a ton of competition in libertarian primaries in Indiana, but it would be kind of interesting for the exposure, for the party. And I think that's pretty cool. I would love to see, wouldn't it be crazy if in a state like Indiana or Wisconsin with open primaries that that there'd be Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, all these other parties in the primaries. That would be super cool. Probably won't happen though. It takes a lot of effort to make those kind of things happen, but it'd be very interesting. So anyway, but then in Indiana, when in both states, what I really do like is they straight up ask you when you get your driver's license whether or not you want to register to vote, how you want to register, and then they mail the stuff to you. I'm not sure what it's like everywhere else. I think most states are this way now. And that just makes the process super easy because you have to get a driver's license anyway most of the time. And you have to, you know, I really despise the Bureau of Motor Vehicles in Indiana because it's such a convoluted process. But still, you go there, they ask you about it, and it's just you're like, okay, this is part of on my mind about this. And then when you go to vote and you have this ID card, it's no struggle at all, right? You unless you've moved, which then you have changed stuff. But it's not much of a struggle, It's not very hard. It's very easy, and that's why I always find it slightly disconcerting when people are like, "Oh, that process is super hard." I don't know. I mean, I guess in an urban place like New York City, it is harder to just drop by the motor vehicles department and fill out that kind of stuff, or maybe they give you the runaround or something. But I've never experienced it in Kentucky or Indiana, and I don't know anybody who has. you know, um, it's just they don't give you a runaround about registering. You just do it when you apply for any kind of official documentation. So, it's great. It's really not that hard, and like I said, it's fun. And I want to also talk about that because I want to talk about okay, what's it like on voting day? And I'll spend one more time. So why did I say Indiana was weird compared to Kentucky? Well, so in Kentucky, you generally have counties or cities, and that's where the line is on things that you vote for. And then, of course, you have state house and state senate districts, which are kind of weird. Those are kind of gerrymandered and weird. So are the congressional districts. Like, for instance, the state house district, that's the biggest race that I'm going to be able to vote for this time, is we saw we saw both candidates at a parade that was in the next county over that we don't technically live in, but we're voting in this one even though the biggest city in our county is in a different state house district. So there you go. The lines get weird and convoluted sometimes. But in Indiana, the thing I found incredibly odd was not only did you have to pay attention to whether you were in the city or the county and uh, whose city or county district you were in, they also had this layer of government called townships. Now, in Wisconsin, they have townships too, and most states in the Upper Midwest do because they're part of the Northwest Territory. But in Indiana, in particular, fire and EMS services are tied to the townships and other things too. So they technically have government boards that take parts of your tax money and distribute it. So these are actually important elected offices, and you got to pay attention to these people. And there's almost zero exposure in the papers about what these people do, who they are, if anyone's running against them. And it was quite arduous to just even find any information on these people, especially when we were living in the city of Bloomington where Indiana University was, and there was more stuff because the university, the big paper there was going after these people. But we moved out to the next county over, Owen County, and we were by this town called Spencer. I couldn't even figure out what the candidates' positions were on anything. I couldn't find any information looking around, whereas, Bloomington did a little bit of effort, you know. And here we are getting a bunch of mailers, thankfully, about people, but the city mayor race, there's two people running, and one guy has stuff all over town, and I haven't seen anything about the other candidate or what their stances are and things. And then there's like 15 seats that are totally unopposed. So that's quite I don't know what to make of unopposed seats. Does that mean the person's really that good, or does that mean no one just bothered to run against them? Um, I guess you just have to find it out. Some people will like, well, I'll never vote for an unopposed person. I'll write somebody in. I think that's a bit ridiculous. Somebody, if they really want to, can run against somebody. It's not too hard. I have friends, that I've met that are actually got on the ballot in the congressional race in the 6th district, and so it's not an insurmountable thing to get on the ballot if you really want to. So I find that kind of crazy that some people are like, they're the position for, let's see, like jailer, for county jailer, there's no opposition because they've been squashing any type of competition to be allowed in the ballot with dirty tricks. I just don't believe that. That's a bit of an absurd claim. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, those are so I'm going to be voting on. There is a constitutional amendment up for grabs, and I do also like that. There, in Indiana and Kentucky, I'm not sure if every state's this way, but whenever there's a constitutional amendment up for grabs, it goes out to the general public to vote on. And I think that may actually annoys people because a lot of times they get voted down because of that. But yeah, so there's one up on this ballot for a this thing called Megan's Law, and I think they want stuff disclosed about criminals after they've been released or something. And it's kind of sticky to me. It does seem a bit like an invasion of privacy, so I'm probably going to vote no. Not to say that, you know, I don't know. It just seems like it's a slippery slope, if you will. That's kind of how I feel about it. And it seems like it's really been railroaded through. Like, where'd this amendment come from out of nowhere? Why isn't there, a different kind of amendment to fund the state pension or something? That's how I feel about it. So I'm probably going to vote no, but it'll probably pass because people just have heard a bunch of ads for it on the radio with the scary music in the background. Like, I was beat up by this guy 20 years ago, and now I can't actively see all of his records. It's like, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, would you want people tracking you down for stuff all the time? I don't know. I guess I'm just, too much anti that sort of thing. Anyway, yeah, so that's what I know about voting. And then of course in Indiana I noticed people were really close to the voting place. Like the candidates were like almost up against the door. And I'm going to be interested to see if I get that vibe in Kentucky. I didn't really feel it when I voted in college, but again, I was a college kid, so maybe I don't really remember it that well. But if I go up there and I see people in Indiana, they were literally up against the door. It was pretty crazy. It was like, man, I mean, and they spray painted a line in the sidewalk by the school. That's the other thing. Schools are generally voting places and they're closed. I don't know what they do around you, but I think they do that fairly obviously across the country. Oh, and voting times. This is the other thing that drives me crazy. So both Indiana and Kentucky are like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And people always complain, well, I had such a hard time voting. How do you have a hard time? I just get up a little earlier than usual in the morning and go vote. I mean, it's not that hard. I've never had a huge line either. I mean, even when I was in Lexington when it was very populated, it still wasn't that hard for me to just get up early and go vote. It's I, so and that 6 p.m. closing time means they cut off the line. Like if you're still there and the line's still up, they're gonna let you in to vote. But generally, I get bothered by people saying, "Well, it's a, I couldn't get in to vote because it was too late," or there's a big line at the end of the day. Get up in the morning and go vote. It's not hard, and I guarantee you, 90% of employers, if you had some trouble in the morning, you're like a couple of minutes late, they would not care. This is America. We don't care if people are coming to vote. In fact, I'm technically in some jobs in Kentucky. I don't know what it's like in Indiana. They actually give you time off to vote, which I probably won't even take because I'm just too busy. But it's like, how hard is it? Just get up, go vote. It's not hard at all. I mean, just go in and then come back. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too motivated. Part of this is you have to. I guess some people just don't want to vote as badly as I do. Anyway, so this whole episode was kind of a response because the Dove Party, one of my friends in podcasting, Santel, she did her episode about voting, so I figured I'd do mine. So anyway, yeah, any Americans listening to this podcast, make sure you go out and vote Tuesday. Um, Tuesday, November. Let's see, today's the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Make sure you all go out to vote, and yeah, that's what my voting experience is like. So, talk to you later. Bye.